Okay, everyone, I think we're going to get started here today. If anybody has any questions or comments, you could please, if you could please type them in the chat, that would be fantastic. I will address them at the end of the review. And if anybody has any comments that they would like city staff to look at, or suggestions or whatever related to the action plan that you'll see here, which is available on the city website, you can send your comments to buildingforms@cityofcapecanaveral.org and just simply title the email header 2021 City of Cape Canaveral Resiliency Action Plan comments. Again, that is buildingforms@cityofcapecanaveral.org and title your email header 2021 City of Cape Canaveral Resiliency Action Plan comments. Thank you. So as I said, my name is Zach Eichholz. I serve as the city's Sustainability Program Manager, Resilience Planner. I've been with the city now for about 2 years, or yeah, coming up on 2 years in June. And one of my tasks when coming here was to write such an action plan as you'll see today, to do many different things. And we'll go over all of that together. So reviewing what we'll go over today, we will review the need for a resiliency action plan. Why do we want one? Why do we need one? We'll go over some background material and review of the plan's development process, which has been ongoing now for quite some time, actually. We'll have a first overview of Cape Canaveral's draft plan. We'll have a brief section by section review of the city's action plan. We'll go over the preparedness targets, which are really the bread and butter of the plan that drive a lot of its policy developments. And then we'll discuss briefly what comes after this public comment and review session. So the plan development process. The city really started this process in 2018. It's been in development through a step-by-step process that started with the city being awarded a grant to develop a vulnerability assessment. It was funded by a grant from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection through their Florida Resilient Coastlines program, which is a NOAA-approved program. The assessment, created in conjunction with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, examines the impacts of sea level rise and flooding in the city of Cape Canaveral. The report employs several models developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and NOAA to project possible sea level rise scenarios and the respective impacts of the city, the respective impacts on the city. The timeframes evaluated as part of the assessment include 2040, 2070, and 2100. The report also models future sea level rise and its effects on storm surge from tropical cyclones like hurricanes. The development of this assessment involved public meetings, public outreach via the city's social media channels, and an online survey, and took the better part of a year to complete from start to finish. In August of 2019, this assessment and its results and its recommendations were unanimously accepted by the City Council. That same summer, staff began researching and developing a resiliency action plan that would take this assessment's recommendations and turn them into actionable targets for eventual adoption and implementation in order to mitigate and better prepare the city for current and future hazards. So before moving forward, I wanted to briefly summarize some of the assessment's conclusions and recommendations, as these played a direct role in formulating the resiliency action plan. And this vulnerability assessment is available on the city's website under our sustainability webpage at any time if you'd like to read it. So some of the things that the vulnerability assessment touched on and concluded was that the city of Cape Canaveral can expect a projection of anywhere from 5.15 to 8.48 feet of sea level rise by 2100. However, impacts from sea level rise could begin to be felt as early as the 2030s in the form of things like sunny day flooding, stormwater backups, and inundation of some of the city's lower lying areas, including along State Road A1A, especially after things like rainstorms. The city will continue to have an increasingly older population. It was recommended that immediate work should begin to harden infrastructure and expand resiliency efforts as a whole. It recommended that the city should increase its on-site renewable energy usage for power assurance and continuity of operations, as well as to lower utility cost. The city should utilize forward-thinking, low-impact development practices and green infrastructure to improve stormwater capacity. The city should capitalize on the opportunities afforded by sustainable development and resilience planning, meaning to say that while some of the challenges that we'll be discussing here soon may seem difficult and daunting, they should be viewed as opportunities, to a chance to really transform the city into a hyper-local based sustainable municipality that is safe, more secure, healthier, and ready to handle whatever may come its way. According to a report by the National Institute of Building Sciences, for every $1 spent on disaster mitigation projects, such as improving stormwater management systems or strengthening buildings against hurricanes, an average of $6 is saved on future relief costs. It is also estimated that investment in sustainable low-carbon technologies and measures that are cleaner and therefore healthier within cities could cut global urban emissions by 90% by 2050 and would have a net present value of almost $24 trillion, which is equivalent to nearly 1/3 of the global GDP in 2018. So given the extensive scientific background and public comments provided through the development and completion of the city's vulnerability assessment, the document provides an excellent backbone on which to develop a resiliency action plan in order to turn its various recommendations into actionable targets to strive towards. And today, after over a year of work, 2 years of work, we are finally able to proudly present a working draft of the city's 2021 Resiliency Action Plan, the first such document in the city's history. So now let's give some context and further supporting information as to why the city needs the Resiliency Action Plan to help set the stage for what we and residents can expect moving into the century. If we adopted our own, we would join a growing list of municipalities that are developing and implementing such plans due to many of the same reasons I'll touch on in a moment. A future-ready city, as it's called, is a city that is prepared to handle various shocks and stressors across a wide range of economic and climate-related events through the use of sustainable, resilient, and forward-thinking infrastructure and policies. Resiliency in the context we are discussing today is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems within a region to plan, sustain, adapt, recover, and improve, as well as grow collaboratively, regardless of what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they may experience, through specific actions and implementation strategies geared to address specific vulnerabilities. A common phrase you hear around the word resilience is the ability to, quote, build back better. A future-ready city must balance economic growth, environmental well-being, and community equity in order to be prosperous, safe, and resilient. These three capitals drive sustainable development. As we move forward into the century, Florida, the nation, and indeed the world has seen more and more impactful events that showcase the imbalances of these three societal markers and the consequences of these imbalances. Brevard County and the city of Cape Canaveral are at a crossroads that now require new forms of planning, adoption of 21st century smart infrastructure, and cleaner, independent forms of energy. I say we are at a crossroads because we are seeing an economic explosion across our area as a result of the emerging space-based economy through the commercialization of space travel, the growth of Port Canaveral, and the general economic enhancement of the county. And the city, given its location as quite literally being in the middle of all this, is set to become a hub of activity for industry and tourism. But on the other end of the spectrum, we also are set to deal with numerous natural hazards, such as increased tropical cyclone activity and sea level rise, that could have a negative and long-lasting impact on residents and businesses if we do not act now, impinging on this growth and our overall well-being. We need a direction and a vision to navigate this crossroad. We need, simply put, a plan. So let's briefly discuss the challenges presented by each of the three capitals mentioned in the previous slide, but boiled down to the local level of the city that necessitate the formation of an action plan, economically, environmentally, and socially speaking. Here we'll start with some economic challenges. To briefly hit off some points, the city faces a generally increasing residential population and an expanding number of visitors and tourist populations, increased industry, and more transportation in and around the city. Again, this is mainly due to the expanding of Port Canaveral, the commercialization of space travel, and a general uplift in economic activity across Brevard and Central Florida. We are an economic gateway into the Central Florida area. A regional multimodal hub, as you can see in the graphic on the left side of the slide, which comes from the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization. As you can see in the lower right graphic, Brevard's population is projected to continue to rise, nearing 1 million people by 2050. This projection comes from the University of Central Florida's College of Business Administration's Institute of Economic Competitiveness. What impacts does this population increase have on our city, on our environment, and on our infrastructure? Are we prepared to handle this expansion and growth and have an economy that is diverse and resistant to shocks and stressors while also being focused for local growth and opportunities? This economic growth comes on the back of increasingly demanding environmental challenges, many of them our own doing. But in that fact, we have an opportunity to remedy these challenges and all the while guide the city towards a more hyperlocal, environmentally minded set of infrastructure. We are faced with a deteriorating Indian River Lagoon ecosystem, highlighted in the Marine Resources Council's latest Indian River Lagoon report card, something we put out on the weekly update for residents to see late last year. The Indian River Lagoon occupies 40% of Florida's east coast, comprises 6 counties and 39 cities, generates $7.6 billion annually into Florida's economy, or generates $7.6 billion annually towards Florida's economy, is home to 1.6 million residents, and is one of the most biologically diverse estuaries in the continental United States, with 4,300 species documented. Separately, a study released by the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council and the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council in 2016 concluded that there is a 33-to-1 return on investment from a productive and sustainable Indian River Lagoon. In other words, every dollar invested in the lagoon's health, there is a $33 worth of economic benefit returned. We must do our part in maintaining and preserving this natural asset. A collapse of its ecosystem would be devastating to the area and, of course, to the city. The city is also facing increased tropical cyclone activity, as made evident by the historic 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. Tropical cyclone impacts are, of course, being made worse by sea level rise, and we are seeing higher rainfall rates than in previous decades. 2020 was a stark reminder of the challenges we are facing, with a record number of billion-dollar weather and climate-related disasters being recorded by NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information at 22. Together, these 22 disasters resulted in $95 billion in damages, continuing an increasing trend of not only more disasters being observed, but higher associated damage cost totals. 2020 was the 4th highest ever recorded in terms of damage costs, the highest being observed in 2017, when weather and climate-related disasters cost the nation over $300 billion. You can see this increasing trend expressed in the chart at the top of the slide, with both the average cost and average number of billion-dollar weather and climate-related disasters increasing over the last 3 decades. Following this trend, simply put, entails that the city has an increasing likelihood of being affected by one such disaster as we move into this decade and beyond. The reasons for this increasing trend, as stated by NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, is, and I quote, due to a combination of increased exposure, vulnerability, and the fact that climate change is increasing the frequency of some types of extremes that lead to billion-dollar disasters, unquote. Alongside these disasters is an increasing number of power outages. There has been a 67% increase in major power outages from weather and climate-related events since the year 2000. This statistic is important to remember, as I will come back to that in a moment. Again, the 2020 hurricane season was unprecedented, and we as a city, while not entirely unaffected, were very lucky given what played out. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season was the most active Atlantic hurricane season ever recorded, having a total of 30 named storms, 11 of which ended up making landfall in the US, which is another record. 5 of these cyclones either made landfall or had significant impacts in the state of Louisiana, the state of Louisiana. The hurricane season alone saw a total of $51.146 billion in damages. This graphic from NOAA here on the slide and the National Weather Service represents the stunning scope of the hurricane season, with every single coastal area of the entire U.S. Gulf Coast and the eastern seaboard being put under some type of tropical cyclone-related watch or warning at some point during the season, in many cases multiple times. Warmer water temperatures are fueling more powerful hurricanes, and there is evidence to suggest that hurricanes on average are actually slowing down in terms of their forward speed, creating longer-lasting impacts and increased flooding events. A study published in June of 2019 by federal scientists found that between 1944 and 2017, hurricane speeds decreased by 17%, leading to more instances of storms stalling out over any given area. Some recent examples include Hurricane Dorian stalling over the Bahamas in 2019, and Hurricane Harvey in 2017, bringing 60+ inches of rain to the state of Texas. There was also Hurricane Sally in 2020, bringing long-lasting flooding events to the Florida Panhandle. And here is a really good example of the type of situation that we are preparing for in the city. God forbid should it ever happen. This is an example that was seen during Hurricane Sally in 2020 last year. This is a bridge in Pensacola, Florida, that was unfortunately destroyed when a barge broke free of its moorings due to storm surge and high winds. And it unfortunately hit one of the bridge piers and caused the bridge to collapse, severing critical services and delaying response times. So, given the situation that the city is linked to the mainland via bridges similar to this, we're planning for a scenario where we need to be on our own for a prolonged period of time, where we can generate our own water, our own power, and be able to meet critical services of residents who need the help the most. Sea level rise, which is being observed across the globe by satellites, tide gauges, and visual markers, is also compounding the effects of these storms, making their storm surges higher than they normally would be. Tide data from Trident Pier in Port Canaveral clearly shows an increase in the level of annual high tide events, and a consequence of this is increased coastal flooding and inundation. An example of this happened last September, when the city saw one of its highest non-tropical related storm surge events. Trident Pier's tide gauge saw a 2.69-foot water rise at high tide, causing most of the city's beach to flood, and the waves impacting the beach's sand dunes. This was the fourth highest water rise recorded at Trident Pier, behind Hurricane Irma in 2017, Hurricane Francis in 2004, and Hurricane Jeanne of the same year. This was in part what led us to double the number of sea oats we planted this year along the city's dune line, set at 20,000 sea oats. Normally we would do 10,000. With flooding already a concern among residents and staff, this increasing level of flooding events must get our full attention, and we must plan for a future that will likely have much more water in it. Now, socially, the city faces an aging population in general that brings a whole host of other issues, one of which being safety. We know a number of our residents are disabled, elderly, and do not have access to a vehicle for travel. Remember the statistic I gave about increasing instances of weather and climate-related power outages? Well, this is where this comes into play. Power outages, especially in the summer months, are potentially very dangerous to elderly within only a relatively short period of time, heightening our need for more hardened and resilient infrastructure and services that can operate independently of the mainland if need be. There are rising costs of living and goods, and there's a possibility of decreased access to basic needs, especially in a post-disaster situation given our position as a barrier island municipality. This position makes us already inherently more vulnerable. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly put such supply shortages front and center, showcasing the risk disasters pose, especially to our most vulnerable. On this slide is a population pyramid for the city of Cape Canaveral, actually taken from the Resiliency Action Plan, clearly showing that a majority of the city's population is and will likely continue to be older, as denoted by the larger bars at the top of the pyramid within the 55 and over age range. Now we'll take you through this plan and each of its sections, briefly summarizing them and stating what each section's purpose is within the document. This action plan is a living document. I want to stress that. It is not intended to remain stagnant in its policy directives and infrastructure plans. Like the world around us, it is designed to change and be changed as necessary, with built-in review periods by staff that are open to the public to ensure maximum efficiency, equity, and success. As stated before, this action plan will give staff the vision and direction they need to plot a course for sustainable and resilient development in the city for decades to come. The city is currently undertaking many sustainability and resilience-based initiatives, but the city does not have a guiding document that sets deliverables and implementation periods. We do not have a document that makes clear the city's intentions involving sustainability and resilience, and its commitment to them, at least not like this one would be. It's a document that will allow us to lead by example and showcase to the community at large why sustainability and resilience is the way to go, and it will allow the city to stand out among local, state, and national grant applicants, offering us greater chances of acquiring grant funding by displaying not only our commitment, but also that we have shovel-ready projects in the pipeline ready for implementation. A few months ago, Governor Ron DeSantis announced his proposal to state his proposed state budget for fiscal year 2021 and 2022, which stands at $96.6 billion. And according to the governor, it addresses the challenges of sea level rise, intensified storm events, and localized flooding by establishing the Resilient Florida program, which will provide $1 billion over 4 years to provide grants to state and local government entities, the exact kinds we'd like to take advantage of if we can. It is often the case that when cities adopt a plan such as this, there is a noticeable acceleration of progress. And I can speak from this personally, or speak to this personally, actually, as when I was working for the city of Satellite Beach from before my current position now in the city of Cape Canaveral, we adopted a sustainability action plan that had very similar targets and things like that. And within 18 months of adoption of the plan in 2017, the city had completed already half of the plan's initiatives, or had them at least on the drawing board ready for implementation. The core of Cape Canaveral's plan are 8 action categories, which include, in order, green economy, natural systems, transportation, energy, built environment, equity and quality of life, waste and consumption, and storm readiness and sea level rise. Within and spread across these 8 categories are 56 preparedness targets, the actual actionable items and goals we will be striving to accomplish with this document based on the recommendations set forth by the vulnerability assessment and its public comments. Now let's do a brief section by section overview of the action plan. First in the document, we have the Cape Canaveral vision statement. Then we have a message from the city to the community, a letter meant to speak to both those living here now and in the future. Then we have an executive summary that of course summarizes the document and its goals. Next is a discussion about the city's demographics, highlighting some of the city's more vulnerable populations. The next 2 sections focus on the need for resilient and sustainable policies in much the way we've already done here today. In the next section, from state to local, policies already driving change, we discuss some of the state and federally mandated policies that we must follow and comply with already, and how adopting this action plan will help us to continue to do that. The section after this discusses the city's vulnerability assessment and how it shaped the action plan. Then we have a section that summarizes some of the past and ongoing sustainability and resilience-based initiatives the city has already conducted. In the next couple of sections, we have the true deliverables of the plan, its 8 action categories, and the preparedness targets set within them. We'll talk more about the preparedness targets in a moment. These 8 action categories are designed to encompass a broad range of socioeconomic and environmental topics that, addressed altogether, can allow us to fulfill our goals of making a more sustainable and resilient municipality. First in the list of 8 is green economy. This section discusses why it is important to promote and expand a green economy within the city, or one that is hyperlocal, diverse, encourages environmental stewardship, and utilizes while maintaining natural assets for ecotourism. Next is natural systems. This category will help the city take actions in the preservation and mitigation of its surrounding natural systems, both land and water, while also improving its resiliency through the implementation of green infrastructure, like increased stormwater capacity, tree plantings, and living shorelines. Next is transportation. This category reviews the need for improved transportation infrastructure that is accessible, moves the city beyond purely car-based transportation to be more bikeable and walkable, and prepares the city for continued adoption of alternative fuel vehicles, both around the community and for the city's own fleet. Next is energy. This category reviews the need for cleaner, homegrown, renewable energy systems to provide power assurance, continuity of critical operations, lower utility costs, and reduced emissions. It sets targets for moving facilities towards renewable energy and providing residents with the means to do so as well. Next is built environment. This category reviews the city's built environment, which is anything that is man-made, and discusses how to make it more resilient. This section is one of the more policy-driven sections and would see staff updating codes in order to make community more resilient against flooding, allowing for more stormwater capture, and reducing the environmental burden of the city's facilities as a whole. Next is equity and quality of life. This category reviews equity and quality of life and calls for educational campaigns to empower residents and in compliance with AARP's 8 domains of livability. lays out the direction to develop a separate equity and community-driven social sustainability action plan to tackle subjects like affordable housing and food access. In the context of sustainability, the term equity has to do with fairness, whether all people have similar rights and opportunities, basic needs to maintain an acceptable quality of life. It is such a large topic that it really will require its own document, and that's just what we call for here. Next is waste and consumption. Next category of waste and consumption specifically deals with, as the title suggests, reducing the amount of waste the city produces and plots out active steps to accomplish this. The planet is suffering from a waste crisis. Solid waste pollution, mostly in the form of plastics, is overwhelming natural ecosystems and threatening to now even cause harm to humans as plastics make their way back up the food chain. Curbing our waste and utilizing longer-lasting, environmentally friendly alternatives is vital to reducing our impacts. And finally, we have storm readiness and sea level rise. This action category reviews issues relating to tropical cyclones, flooding, and sea level rise, and plots out various mitigation steps, infrastructure hardening projects intended to reduce impacts, especially at critical city facilities such as the water reclamation facility, that could reduce damage costs by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Then we have a listing of all 56 preparedness targets and appendices. The 3 appendices include a listing of critical facilities compiled in the city's vulnerability assessments, references, and a glossary of frequently used terms. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about the 56 preparedness targets outlined within the action categories. There is no reason for there being 56. This is just a number there happened to be after drafting. There could be more or less in the document, but we thought this was an appropriate and manageable number to begin with, as some are extensions of projects that are already being undertaken, while others are entirely new. So, what is a preparedness target? It is an actionable living target set within the plan to provide policy direction for staff and leadership for the community. They are categorized within 4 different implementation periods, which are current and ongoing, 5 years, 15 years, and 30 years. The reason these targets go out until mid-century, around 2050, is because this is considered to be a safe buffer zone, buffer period between when the city can implement and accomplish meaningful mitigation strategies, mainly in regards to sea level rise, before the worst of the effects are realized sometime in the 2060s and onwards, according to the city's 2019 vulnerability assessments. It allows us ample time to make changes we need, allow for proper budgeting and proper scoping of projects, especially larger capital projects. Preparedness targets are to be assessed every 5 years via a staff review, essentially auditing the action plan, ensuring the targets we are striving to meet are actually being met and how successful the implementation is. Plan updates would be made public and there would be a public comment period to see community input. A status report would also be developed to showcase where each preparedness target is in terms of implementation and/or success. This 5-year review is also an opportunity to remove or change preparedness targets as needed for whatever reason. Perhaps one has been successful and is no longer needed. One cannot be fiscally completed, etc., etc. Each preparedness target in the plan is broken down into 5 subsections. The target is stated in the first section. The purpose of the target is outlined next. The implementation period is stated. A brief description of the target's implementation strategy is given. A measure of success is stated that will assist with future reviews. I also want to make clear that really none of these 56 targets, as written in the plan, currently and explicitly call for regulations and/or the banning of anything among residents and businesses. We do not believe in a city like Cape Canaveral that moving to put in place overbearing regulations or bans is the answer to see the change that we want. Regulations and bans can obviously be very scary to individuals, and some may not be able to handle them economically speaking. This is why we really want to lead by example. The vast majority of targets only apply to city infrastructure, internal staff policy changes, and allow the city to lead by example for its residents, with us providing assistance educationally for whoever may want to follow our example. Some of the targets may also seem somewhat vague, and this is on purpose, as this allows for wiggle room to work and scope out what we need based on real-world assessments that will eventually be needed to be conducted to implement some of them, which could cause them to change. Many of these targets are actually serve to empower residents and businesses, allowing change to come organically through real-world examples set by us, which will hopefully result in a natural community buy-in as we progress further along with the plan's initiatives. A great example of this and how much of the targets work is the city's annual sea oats planting event. This is a city-led program that empowers residents to be a force for good through a sustainable and resilient initiative that now sees massive community support and buy-in. People understand the need for sea oats. They wholeheartedly enjoy the events, and it fosters great community outreach and provides a very tangible benefit to the entire city through its protection of the dune line. Now imagine this program but extended to other things like tree planting programs or native plantings along the lagoon, solar initiatives, oyster gardening, enhanced recycling programs. If such buy-in and support can be extended across other sustainability fields such as these through our leadership and our actions, then imagine the possibility for good we can foster for residents both now and in the future. I also want to add that this plan is not the end all. We are talking about topics here that are so vast and encompassing that some will undoubtedly need their own spin-off documents, policies, and even other plans. So we are aiming to have the action plan finished through public comment and adopted no later than June of this year, so that we may begin the work of implementing its contents, as there is much to do and little time to waste. Our action plan comes about as the county actually begins to have its own similar initiative in the form of Resilient Brevard, which is an excellent development and will hopefully align new projects and initiatives between ourselves and the county. The Brevard County Natural Resources Management Department has launched Resilient Brevard, a project to develop proactive strategies, policies, and a plan of action to increase resilience to the impacts of climate change. Resilient Brevard seeks to identify coastal vulnerabilities and provide local policy recommendations to minimize and mitigate the effects of flooding, storm surge, and sea level rise. The project launched by Brevard County and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council is focused on 5 general areas: economic resilience, public services and safety, resilient development, public health and equity, and resilient and nature-based practices. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I encourage you to send anything that you may wish to ask to buildingforms@cityofcapecanaveral.org, and just simply please title the header 2021 City of Cape Canaveral Resiliency Action Plan Public Comments, and then we'll take it from there. I thank everybody for attending today. It's very important that we get here comments that anybody may have, and this session is recorded, so if anybody would like to see it or the other ones that we did, they're available on the city's social media channels, specifically the city's YouTube page. So with that, we thank you for all your time. If anybody has any questions now, feel free to type them in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them. I think we have a good number of minutes left, so if anybody would like to say something, you can or put your comments in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you. Okay, I'm so far not seeing any comments in the chat or questions. So with that, I think we'll end up wrapping it here. Again, if anybody has any comments or recommendations they'd like us to look at in regards to the Resiliency Action Plan, please send anything you have to buildingforms@cityofcapecanaveral.org and title the header of your email 2021 City of Cape Canaveral Resiliency Action Plan comments. We appreciate any feedback. that you may have. Thank you very much for attending and have a great day. Bye-bye.